Afternoon, everybody. Welcome. I'm Mary Louise Kelly. I host All Things Considered on NPR. And to you too, welcome back. A quarter century ago, the 50th anniversary of the Aspen Institute, a not a day younger looking Michael Sandel of Harvard and Thomas Friedman of the New York Times had a debate about globalization. We are about to get some copy up on the screen that will give us a sense. It might be too small to read from the back of the room, but I will tell you that if you go back in the archives, that what was said on this stage 25 years ago, Tom Friedman, you back in 2000 were focused on how we were moving from a Cold War world of division and walls to one of integration and webs. And you sounded really excited about this super cool thing, the World Wide Web. You were right.
Kind of worked out.
Yeah. Michael, you were worried about a growing gap that you saw between rich and poor in this country, that rich and poor were increasingly living separate lives, that we were living in different neighborhoods and sending our kids to different schools and opting in or out of public transport, and you were worried about the basic fairness or lack thereof, but also the damage to what you called our shared civic life, and you were right. So we convened today to mark the 75th anniversary of the Aspen Institute, and we've invited you back to share what's changed and what hasn't, and get your take on the forces shaping our world today. I'm going to talk, among other things, we're going to talk about our democracy. Are we in trouble? If so, how much, how deep, and how do we get out of it? What can we do? We're going to talk about tech and AI and how it is changing our lives even as we sit here today. Michael, and I have to share, I am tempted to call him, and I may lapse into calling you Professor Sandel. He's probably taught half the people in this room. Mm-hmm. You were my professor 30 plus years ago. You gave me, as I recall, a B-, which I deserved. And this was your famous class, Justice, which I made the mistake of teaching in the fall of my very first year before I had figured out that it might be a good idea to do the reading, that it would all make a bit more sense and you might do a little better on the final exam if you did that. I'm going to give you first question. To that theme of democracy in trouble, would you trace a line from where we are now back to the thing that was causing you anxiety 25 years ago, that people who move around in Range Rovers and private jets, if they never come into contact with people who move around on city buses, we have a problem?
Yes. The world without walls at the time seemed an exhilarating prospect. The metaphor was drawn from the fact that the Berlin Wall had fallen. Everything seemed possible. Liberal democratic capitalism seemed the only system left standing. Some said the end of history was at hand. Ideological conflict was over. The divide was no longer between left and right, but between open versus closed. And that contrast described what seems in retrospect a certain hubris about a world without walls, which essentially was a euphemism for a version of neoliberal globalization or market-driven globalization that insisted on the free flow of capital and goods and people across national borders. The promise was it would make us all better off. Not only that, global integration would move countries like China and maybe Russia in the direction of greater democracy and freedom. It didn't work out that way.
Not exactly.
There was economic growth, but most of the economic growth from 1980 to the 2000 teens went to those at the top. Most of it went to the top 10%. The portion that went to the bottom half in the United States was about zero. From 1980, this is to 2015.
To 2015. Okay.
I'm sorry, to 2015.
Yep.
And so what the world without walls produced was prosperity for some, precarity for most, and a wellspring of grievance, anger, rancor, and resentment that fueled a populist backlash so fierce and rancorous that it today casts a shadow over the future of democracy.
But to the question of what has changed from 2000 to now, 25 years later, without defending the state of affairs that you were already identifying a quarter century ago of people living in different neighborhoods, different schools, different lives, was it not always so? Did rich and poor not always live in different neighborhoods, send their kids to different schools?
Well, it wasn't always so. One thing Tom and I share, notwithstanding our small disagreements about globalization and markets, is we both grew up in a suburb of Minneapolis, Minnesota. And when we were kids, there was people who made more money lived in somewhat bigger houses, but there wasn't that much difference in, at least within middle-class American communities. We went to public schools. We played without managed play. We just poured out onto the streets and onto the playgrounds. And we weren't that aware of the class background or the parental income of the people we encountered. The public schools, at least in these middle-class communities, were strong enough and good enough so that people who were parents who were well off and parents who were just getting by all wanted to send their kids there. So there was a kind of democratic equality of condition that I think cultivated a sense of a shared civic life and common purpose, neighborliness, a sense of community, and a sense of the possibility that politics could make things better.
Yeah. I suppose, too, I mean, social media didn't exist at all. We couldn't see how everyone else was living their lives. It has brought many good things. It's great to see that other people are moving through the world in very different ways from us, but it also stokes some of the resentment you're speaking to. Catch us up on how your thinking on this has evolved in these 25 years, Tom Friedman.
Well, as Michael alluded to, we've been having this discussion, not exactly this one, but for a long time, since we were in Hebrew school together when we were 8 years old. We went to Brandeis together. He was a Rhodes Scholar. I was a Marshall Scholar at Oxford together. He was the best man at our wedding. Wow. And I got to sign his son's wedding contract. So we've taught together. And what we've always prided ourselves on is to model respectful disagreement. And as Michael alluded to, we actually start in the same place. If my column had a proper name for it, accurate name, it would not be called Foreign Affairs. It would be called Always Looking for Minnesota. That's really what my column should be called. Because Michael and I were born at a moment, Axios had this graph, basically a polarization in America, I think it was 1896 to the present. It looks like this, really high in the late 1800s, goes right down here to a nadir, and then back up to the present. We were born here. Mm-hmm. I grew up in a time and place where politics worked. And so I developed a real liability as a foreign affairs columnist, is I could go anywhere in the world and find the Minnesotan. Okay, I could go to Iraq and find Iraqis who thought just like me. Beirut, same thing. And so I had this optimism bias because I saw politics work. Okay, where Michael and I disagree is that because we both grew up in this period, and I want the same kind of public sphere that he wants. It's really how to get the income to make it possible, and how to deal with these very real income gaps. If you look at globalization just through a very narrow lens, you see these income gaps. Although I would dispute, I mean, the data is basically median incomes in America have grown $50,000 since the year 2000. I've got the data here. Mm-hmm. So this idea that nothing actually happened. What happened is the bottom grew, but the top grew much more, and therefore the gap. So I think that is what was going on economically. But if you look at it from a global point of view, more people came out of poverty in India and China and elsewhere than any time faster in the history of the world. And that does account also partly for this era of global stability. My view is very much, I am a pro-business Democrat. There are 3 people in the zoo left like me, okay? That is, I am for absolutely not unfettered markets, but I'm a proud capitalist. I believe you want to grow the pie and then redivide the pie. And to me, the failure is not globalization, it's the failure of politics.
Go there.
Right.
Are you worried about the state of our democracy?
And so, Michael and I, we taught a class a couple times at Harvard, and we both admire Denmark as a country that has narrow income gaps, great social services. And Denmark's really, I wish America were Denmark. Denmark is the 7th most globalized country in the world. It is a bastion of free markets, giant global corporations. But what Denmark has is a very different social contract than the one we have here. It's a collaborative social contract where business, labor, philanthropists, government all work together. And my own experience, and I wrote about this in my last book, in America. America is a country, people say, divided between 2 coasts. 2 coasts that are liberalizing, globalizing, and modernizing, and then there's flyover America where everyone's high in opioids, voted for Trump, and waiting for 1950 to come back. That's actually not the country. The country is actually a checkerboard, in my experience, of communities that have actually been able to build what I call complex adaptive coalitions, Denmark-like organizations where people in the community, business, philanthropists, social entrepreneurs, I profiled Lancaster, Pennsylvania as one of them, Wilmer, Minnesota, town where my aunt grew up, that are rising, and ones that can't create that collaborative framework, that are falling. And so for me, now Michael will say, and there's truth to it, that because of the income gaps, the top then perverted the politics. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. But my default is always grow the market, grow the pie, then redivide it. Don't try to redivide it and not think about the pie. Otherwise, it's going to get harder and harder to divide.
So you're doing the great journalistic thing of giving us many wise thoughts and not answering my questions. So the state of our democracy now.
Yeah.
If y'all have been friends since you're 8 years old, I don't want to date you, but you've been surveying this for 60 years together. When you look at the state of our country today, as someone who's often seeing it from outside our borders, and we'll get to that, what do you see? Are we in trouble?
I think we're in the most trouble that we've ever been as a country for 2 reasons that I think are obvious to everyone. One reason I can illustrate by an example that last summer I was here for friends had a birthday party, and there was a dinner, the opening dinner, and a gentleman at the dinner, the campaign was on then, said to me, Tom, I heard that CNN cut 30 minutes out of that interview with Kamala Harris because they weren't complimentary to her. And I said, sir, do you know how many people are involved in an interview of a presidential candidate? Probably 1,000 people touched that tape, saw that tape, felt that tape. Do you really think you could keep that quiet? And he thought about that for a second, and then he said the most disturbing thing. He said, well, then CNN needs to clear that up. CNN needs to clear that up. Not what rabbit hole have you been down, you a serious person, to actually buy the notion that CNN did that. And we simply have lost a shared truth. And to me, that is everything. And then we live in a country now where it has become a big industry, a profitable industry, to make people stupid and angry. And you put all that together, it's not the only thing wrong with our politics and the income gaps Michael talks about, I totally agree with. But if we can't agree on even what's happening, then it's really hard to have a political conversation about how to heal it.
Yeah. How do we fix it? What do we do?
Well, we could start by banning cell phones in schools. And I've banned them, and I have a hard time now teaching justice, Mary Louise, with 900 students staring at their phones. And so I banned them in class. Those students now, college students, are so addicted that even though they know it's good for them and it's against the rules to look, they can't restrain themselves.
They're twitching and it's down here. And
Yeah.
you can see it. Yeah.
So I would start there. I would go after the business model of the social media companies that makes it profitable for them to make us angry and outraged. And one way to do this would be to ban targeted digital advertising, because that's what gives them the incentive to keep us glued to our screens for as long as possible to collect our data. That's the second thing. But more than that, I think we have to reconfigure the economy and turn away, as we, in different ways, both the Biden administration and in a heavy-handed blunderbuss way, the Trump administration have moved away from the old neoliberal emphasis on free trade agreements, the free flow of capital, and the like. I don't agree with Trump's mercurial tariff policies, which are more designed to be a kind of potentate to which foreign leaders come to beg indulgence. That's not what tariff policy should be for. But that's not to say that certain targeted tariffs under certain circumstances are not a legitimate instrument. They should be enacted by Congress. It's their power, not the president's, but that's another matter. But in general, having a sensible industrial policy, or at least being able to debate industrial policies, public investment, and we're going to get to technology later, whether we should leave the direction of technological innovation to Silicon Valley entrepreneurs, or have a public debate about how we want to direct priorities for innovation and technology. These, in general, we need a more robust kind of public discourse about these fundamental economic questions than we've become accustomed to.
Just to follow on that, and then I want to bring you back in here, Tom, but the very basic question of the extent to which Wall Street dominates our democracy. I guess on one level that has always been so. I remember in reading in courses, you can go back to Woodrow Wilson and his concerns about finance becoming as powerful a force as government.
Yes.
Do you see that as having changed in any kind of fundamental or relevant way in this last 25 years?
It's changed in a very fundamental way. The share of GDP and of corporate profits accounted for by financial activity, has ballooned in the last three or four decades. Mm-hmm. Now, finance by itself can be a good and productive thing. Its social purpose is to direct capital to socially useful activities, building new homes and companies, factories, schools, hospitals, roads, airports. That's good finance. But the explosion of finance, it now accounts for some 30% of corporate profits. Most of that is not productive finance. It's finance that consists in speculating on the future value of already existing assets. In fact, the best estimate we have is that 85% of finance today is of that kind, and only 15% consists of investing directly in the real economy. And that's been very damaging, not only because it's led to an explosion of the pay gap and inequality, and not only because it's diverted some of the best students and young people to go into speculative finance rather than into productive economic roles in the economy. But it has also had an insidious effect, the valorization of finance and Wall Street, on the dignity of work in the traditional sense. The work performed by people who, whether or not they have a college degree, perform valuable contributions to the economy, providing goods and services of a concrete, tangible kind in the real economy that meet people's needs. And not only has the pay, the pay of the median worker over the past 5 decades in real terms is virtually stagnant. It's gone up by 1% for 5 decades. And that's not only an economic problem, and it not only contributes to the inequality we've been discussing, it reflects and reinforces the sense that the elite in the society, those who set the tone, don't really respect the work that working people perform. And that's an important part, I think, of the anger and the grievance that has fueled the backlash against elites looking down.
Yeah. Tom, to broaden this beyond America's borders, when you were on this stage 25 years ago extolling the promise of globalization, because we didn't know how it was going to work out yet, but you were talking about Cold War walls falling, both literal ones, you mentioned the Berlin Wall, and intellectual ones. Could you have imagined that you would be on stage in 2025 with trade barriers, tariffs going back up, not to mention that the entire post-World War II architecture of global alliances would be in peril?
Well, obviously, I was worried about that. My book, Before the World is Flat, was called The Lexus and the Olive Tree. And the argument was that what will be the system that will follow the Cold War system? Because the Cold War was a system of international relations.
Have you figured it out?
Well, the argument was that at the time, there were some big claims made. The first was Frank Fukuyama. He said it would be the end of history. The second was Sam Huntington. He said it would be a clash of civilizations. Actually, we've seen much more clash within civilizations. Shiites and Sunnis, Chinese and Taiwan, and mainland China. Much more within civilizations and between. Third was Robert Kaplan. He said it'll be the coming anarchy. Well, we've had anarchy, but I don't think it's the world. And the claim I made was that it's actually going to be a tension between our olive tree urges, the things that anchor us, faith, family, sect, tribe, language, region, interacting with this new globalization system. And sometimes our olive tree urges will burst through that system, and sometimes that system will restrain them. And I would say, I still believe that's the framework we're going on in. So there were times when, certainly early on, when the globalization thing was going well, and we were asked at the New York Times, Katie Kingsbury, our editor, asked us last year to do a story on what's the biggest thing you got wrong. So a column, ask all of us. So I had a rich oeuvre to choose from, and so you can't be in this business for 30 years without. And I chose the fact that I thought China would not become a democracy, but that its integration with the world would steadily lead it to more open systems. Now that argument actually held up for a long time until Xi Jinping came along. And he has reversed that trend. But I ended the column by saying, Your Honor, though I would like a suspended sentence, because who declared this year the end of history? I was in China a year ago. I attended the China Development Forum, and so they sent a young woman to the airport, a student, to receive me and help me get through customs and whatnot. And we were just sitting waiting for my bag, and she said to me, Mr. Friedman, I just have to ask you one question. Is the world still flat? And I said, actually, it's flatter than ever in the way I meant it, which is that more people in more places can compete, connect, and collaborate on more things in more ways on more days for less money and greater ease than ever before. She nodded her head. I don't think she really bought it, but she was thinking about it. And then we went 10 minutes more, and then she said to me, Mr. Friedman, I used ChatGPT last weekend. I said, you used ChatGPT on a VPN from Beijing, and you're asking me if the world is flat? Okay. So, I'm not quite ready. That's why I said, Your Honor, I asked for a suspended sentence, because history is curvilinear, and I just don't think the story's over.
Yeah. Speaking of ChatGPT, let me pivot us to AI and share that before I got on the plane to come here, I asked ChatGPT to write about the 2025 Aspen Ideas Festival in the style of Tom Friedman.
This is going to be trouble.
It It took it 9 seconds. Do you want to hear your lead?
Give me the lead.
Dateline, Aspen, Colorado. Every summer, the world's thinkers, tinkerers, and titans gather in the whispering pines of Aspen to swap ideas like baseball cards. Some pristine, some worn, a few revolutionary. You hit your stride in the second graph. ChatGPT, Tom Friedman writes, what struck me this time wasn't just the topics, it was who was doing the talking. More young voices, more from the global south. When a teenage coder from Jakarta is schooling a former Treasury Secretary on decentralized finance, you know the center of gravity is shifting.
Oh.
9 seconds.
Yeah.
It sounds just like you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Scary.
And that was before any of us got here.
Sounds better than me. That's what's really scary.
You can steal it. How long does it take you to write a column?
Yeah. It depends.
On average.
Yeah. The best columns take you as long as it takes your fingers to hit the keys. 45 minutes, because they come from a really deep place. And others take longer. But the best columns are then, because I was a reporter before I was a columnist, I actually like writing columns on deadline. Yeah. And having opinions on deadline is a little different than having news on deadline, because it's all you got to generate. But when the muse is in residence, you can write really fast.
So this goes back to the point you were making about the dignity of work. If AI, among other things, is going to be able to do our jobs nearly as well as we are and a whole lot faster, that raises a lot of issues about whether we will all have jobs in future, but it also raises questions about the dignity that we derive from work. How do we preserve that when machines are going to be so much better at it than we are?
Are we sure about that, first of all, Mary Louise? That would be a question that I would ask. But there is a scenario that the Silicon Valley techno-optimists have in mind. Their picture is that they will invent the robots and the machine learning devices that will come for our jobs. And to prevent the political resistance to that, they will encourage and promote a universal basic income, essentially to buy off the protest against depriving people of work, to pave the way to a world without work. It seems generous on the surface, although I think they have in mind that that universal basic income will probably still be funded by the existing tax system, which does not treat them too harshly. But more than that, it assumes that we could derive meaning and purpose from a world without work, where we were just paid off, so to speak, not to complain about its absence. I don't find that kind of world attractive, mainly because work is not just a way of making a living. It's a way of contributing to the community, to the common good, and winning recognition, honor, social esteem, and dignity for doing so. An economy isn't only about GDP or consumerism. An economy fundamentally is a way of organizing our productive activities, our work, in a way that gives rise to mutual recognition and respect. And we already see, even before the techno-optimist scenario unfolds, that the dignity of work is seriously impaired. The biggest dividing line now in politics is between those with and those without a college degree, a 4-year college degree. And this isn't only because of the economic inequality that corresponds to that gap, but also to the fact that we have so long valorized a college degree and higher education, which I'm all for, but valorizing it as a response to the inequality, as a response to the wage stagnation. Go get a degree. Then you'll be able to compete and win in the global economy. That's what we were told. There's something, what that says is the widening inequalities and the stagnant wages for the average worker are not our fault, the fault of the policymakers. It's your fault. You didn't do what we told you to do to get a degree to improve yourself. The implication is, if you're struggling in the new economy and you didn't get a degree, your failure is your fault. But we easily forget that most Americans don't have a 4-year degree. Nearly 2/3 do not. So it's folly to create an economy that sets as a necessary condition on dignified work and a decent life a diploma that most people don't have. That's why we need to fundamentally, I think, reconfigure the economy, putting the dignity of work at the center. And the AI scenario that comes that imagines the abolition of work, I think would take us further in the direction of depriving people of meaning and purpose and honor and recognition. And that's the crisis that leads to the anger that produces the backlash that we're seeing.
We've talked about AI being able to write a Friedman-esque column in 9 seconds.
Yeah.
I want to apply it to your line of work,
Yeah.
which you've made a career of teaching, writing, thinking deeply about ethics and human values. How do we keep super intelligent machines aligned with human values when we can't even keep humans in line with humans?
Well, that's exactly the question. We can't keep humans aligned with human values. And here's a case in point. The problem that ChatGPT poses for education is, how do we know if students turn in essays written by ChatGPT? Now, there are...
How do you know? Are you running essays through some kind of
well,
software to figure it out?
there is some software that can give you a pretty good guess. It's not infallible. But here's my worry. My main worry is not that kids will be able to cheat. I do worry about that. But there's a deeper worry underlying that goes to the human values. A student in a seminar whom I knew, unlike the large class where it would be hard for me, we do run, the teaching fellows do run in the big class, suspect essays through this software, and then have a meeting with the student if it's suspect. I had a student who turned in a paper that read to me like this was surely written by ChatGPT. And I did run it through the software, and it said 90% likely that it was. So I called him in, and I asked him, I said, this reads to me as if it were ChatGPT. Did you write it, or did you use the app? He said, no, I wrote it. I said, well, why does it read to me as if it were written by ChatGPT? And he had some explanation about how he tends to write in short, choppy sentences, and that's what what ChatGPT does. So I said, why don't you run it through, though he was a tech-savvy student, run it through one of these apps, see what it says, and then write an analysis of how you interpret its findings. Weeks passed, and I didn't get the memo. So I wrote him again. I said, well, what's happened? Finally, he produced a memo giving a long, complex technical explanation with graphs about how ChatGPT tracks styles of writing that are similar to his. Now, what occurred to me after this experience was, which would trouble me more, if he was cheating or if he was telling the truth and that this generation of young people are beginning to think and write like chatbots. Mm-hmm. And my answer is the second worries me more. And that's because that touches on how new technologies, including this one, are beginning to change us, change what it means to be human, thinking, creating.
Did you give him a B minus?
I'm sorry?
B minus? We're going to open it to questions in 1 second, so get yours ready. We have microphones that will go. Tom, one more quick one to you. I don't know if this was a different trip to China than when the woman asked you, is the world still flat? But I read a column you recently wrote about China and AI, in which you were preaching the need, which I do not disagree with, for the U.S. and China to collaborate on creating, and I quote, a global architecture of trust and governance. What gives you confidence that that will happen when the U.S. and China have failed to collaborate on a global architecture of trust on anything? Tariffs, trade, Taiwan, you name it.
It's my Sino-American equivalent of being for a two-state solution. Okay. It may be fanciful to many people, but when you start to break it down and understand, you realize why it's utterly necessary. So when everyone in Washington agrees on anything, Republicans and Democrats, that immediately raises suspicion in my eye. And right now, hating China is pretty much wall to wall, and I'm not in that camp. I'm not loving China either. I'm in the camp that if we don't figure out how to collaborate on AI, bad things are going to happen. So why? This is the framework that I've been working on a book with my friend Craig Mundy that we came up with. So think of the world, the history of the world as three phase changes. And think of humans as the equivalent of water molecules, okay, in a phase change in physics. So from the dawn of man to the printing press was the age of ice. Molecules are very distant and they move very slowly. That's why ice is ice. Technology is heat. Printing press gives us heat, ice melts into water. And now ideas, people, capital start to flow, okay? Right up till 2017, transformer algorithm and AlphaGo zero, which is what creates AI, basically, more heat. And what happens when water is exposed to tremendous heat? It turns into a vapor, okay? I think AI is going to be like a vapor. It's going to go into everything. It's going to your watch. It's going to go into your car. It's going to go into your toaster. It's going to go into your refrigerator. It's going to go into your phone. And it's going to go into your hip replacement. Now, when AI is in everything, everything becomes TikTok. What is this little problem we're having with TikTok? Who controls the algorithm? Who controls the data? How will you feel, Mary Louise, about a Chinese-made hip replacement that is broadcasting its data, how it feels every millisecond? So in my last trip to China, I was attending the China Development Forum, and they asked me to give a talk, and I said, look, I'm not an economist. My name is Thomas Friedman, not Milton Friedman. But I'm just a reporter. And so I'm here to tell you I had a terrible dream last night. I dreamt it was 2030, and all that America could export to China was soybeans. And all that China could sell America was soy sauce. Because when AI is in everything, we are not going to buy anything from them. And when AI is in everything, they're not going to buy anything from us unless we develop very hard a shared architecture of trust about what are the limits of AI and how it can be used. And that may sound crazy fanciful to you folks, and it probably is. But if you think I'm making this up, our Senate right now, in an act of utter insanity, is about to kill our clean energy business, solar and wind. And one of the ways they're doing it is by telling a solar or wind manufacturer, if you have a single Chinese component in your windmill or your solar panel, you will not get any subsidy. So you can see this is coming. And that's why I keep saying we need a new Shanghai Protocol around basically AI trust and disorder. And the mood in Washington and the mood in Beijing, by the way, their America hawks are just as stupid. Because this is the last point I make, to go back to the phase changes. The book we were going to write was called 211.9. because water boils at 212, and we are 1 degree away from one of the most profound transformations in human history.
Your questions. We have a microphone. Raise your hand, and please keep it short, and please keep it a question, because I'd love to get to as many of you as I can. I see a hand back here on this side, midway down, blonde hair.
Thank you.
Hi.
Hi. I have a question. My son, for example, writes papers, and I write him on politics, and I tell him, run it through ChatGPT, rewrite it in the style of Thomas Friedman, and it's amazing. It's very well written. So my question to Michael is, why do you think it's a problem when the kids are actually learning how to write well and concise, or they free up their time and they have the ChatGPT writing in a very good, concise way? So why is that the problem to be precise in your writing?
It's a virtue to be concise in writing. That's not what worries me. What worries me and what enables me to detect, at least so far, when it's been written by ChatGPT, is that my teaching is about equipping students to think and reason for themselves, to argue with one another, to listen to one another about big normative questions, ethical questions, questions about what makes for a just society, what are the ethical implications of AI, for example, what should be the role of money in markets in a good society. And what ChatGPT-induced thinking and writing in response to those kinds of questions consists in is a kind of bland, superficial summary of opinions, usually safe opinions, rather than a genuine grappling with the underlying ethical questions. So far, ChatGPT can't do ethics. Some will say it's only a matter of time. I have my doubts. But students bending their thinking and writing and expression to the algorithmic mode of ChatGPT or AI is to remake our way of being in the world and thinking and dealing with one another in the image of machines.
We have one in the very front, and then I'm going to work my way back here, but we have, yes, sir, right here. Thank you.
Thank you, Jack. I'm fascinated by the nature of your friendship and that you guys have known each other for so long. And I wonder if you could share something about how you've grown together and how maybe there have been times where one of you or the other had a crisis and where the other was a critical source of nurturing and support.
What an interesting question. Well, I would think of one, before social networks. So I'm known at the New York Times. I've never looked at Twitter. I've never looked at Facebook. I've never looked at Instagram. I've never looked at TikTok. And I've never smoked a cigarette. And my plan is to die saying all 5. Okay, so I consume no social media.
And we have that in common.
Exactly. Neither of us consume any social media. Yeah. Before social media, though, as I was emerging, as a reporter and then as a columnist, people, if you want to be this is not a friend growth industry if your kids are thinking about it going into it, okay? If you want to be a columnist, get a dog, okay, if you want a friend, because it's, and I get written about a lot. And it took me a long time, so I would call Michael and say, what? I'm a nice guy. Like, why are they writing about me? And I can't remember how many times I'd call him just for research. Am I that bad? You know what I mean? And so I would. That's what comes to mind in part. And the other is that when I was Michael and I, after Oxford, we took a trip to the Middle East because I wanted to be a Middle East. I wanted to be a foreign correspondent in the Middle East. And at that time, the New York Times had a rule: you couldn't be Jewish and go to Beirut or Jerusalem. So I had to really think through what does it mean to be objective as a reporter. Because then the theory of objectivity was that the most objective reporter is basically the most ignorant. If you want a fair reporter in the Middle East, find a Gentile from Montana and put them in Beirut and Jerusalem, and they'll give you, rather than understanding that objectivity is a tension between understanding and disinterest, and there's a constant tension. And I still remember us standing under a street pole in Oxford, having this discussion with a third friend of ours, Joseph Sassoon, an Iraqi Jew from Baghdad. So those are the ones that come to my mind.
Very good.
Yeah.
Michael, do you want to weigh in on that, or should we move to the next one?
We were both in a Purim carnival when we were about 11 years old.
Yes.
And we can let the audience guess who was Mordecai and who was Haman.
And we'll leave it at that.
There were a
One
couple
was a bad guy and
hands-
one was a good guy.
couple hands in the back. Yes, ma'am, toward the aisle. Yep, thank you.
In a healthy democracy, one of the things that keeps resilience in times of challenge with government as government transforms is a robust civil society and leadership from civic leaders and from industry leaders as well. You're here amongst the tinkerers and the titans, as ChatGPT put it. I'm wondering what you want of the titans in this moment.
Well, from the titans to exercise restraint in using their economic power to bend the democracy to their purposes and will. That requires restraint, which is a civic virtue that is not easy to come by, but that's important for democratic life. For those who work in civil society, I think that we talk a lot about investing in infrastructure, public infrastructure. But what we really need is to rebuild the civic infrastructure of a shared democratic life. And by that I mean trying to create the democratic equality of condition that we were talking about at the outset, to draw us out of our privatized modes of life so that we have institutions in civil society, class-mixing institutions, going back to what Mary Louise summarized from our discussion 25 years ago, that bring people together from different walks of life in the ordinary course of their lives, not only to gather in forums for public debate, which is important, and we need to do a better job of creating those, but public parks, playgrounds, municipal swimming pools, public transportations, and above all, public schools good enough and robust enough that rich and poor alike want to send their kids there. That's the kind of civil society we need to create in order to cultivate the citizenship and sense of democracy as a shared project that could begin to heal the polarization that sets us apart.
Yeah.
So this is something Michael and I profoundly agree with and agree on. I don't think I told you this, Michael, but I had a funny experience. My lecture agent booked me to speak at the I think it's Pittsburgh State like 9 months ago. And so I said, yeah, that's great. Pittsburgh, Washington, D.C., or Pittsburgh's there, no problem. And I got home from a long trip to the Middle East. And it was a day after I had to go, but no problem, it was Pittsburgh. And he called me, he said, well, we got the travel arrangements. I said, yeah. He said, it's Pittsburgh without an H. It's Pittsburgh, Kansas, okay? And I said, well, how do you get there? He said, you have to fly to Chicago, then to Missouri, and then drive to 3 hours to the southern quarter of Kansas. I said, you're killing me, okay? All right. So it was a date I had to honor, so I go to Pittsburgh without an H. And it's in the heart of Trump country, okay? And after I give my talk, the president of the university is interviewing me, like Mary Louise is, and I forgot what the question was, but I said, Donald Trump says his favorite word is tariffs. And I said, my favorite word is public. Public parks, public schools, public swimming pools, public hockey rinks, as I grew up with.
Public radio.
Public radio. Where my daughter is a colleague of Mary Louise. And for that, this was the heart of Trump country. I got the loudest ovation I got all night. And I am sure about one thing, in our country that the single most underestimated value aspiration in American politics is for a president that will pull us together. It's how Joe Biden got elected. I don't think the majority of people like this. I think the issues that Michael is talking about, if somebody were to run on that as the centerpiece, I think they would be amazed at how well they would do.
One more. I agree. I want us to end, despite our disagreements, on building on the emerging point of shared outlook for democracy. We think of the American dream as an individual aspiration, each individual rising through their own strenuous efforts. I look back to see what the person who coined the term, the American dream, had in mind. And it wasn't only individual mobility. It was something closer to the democratic equality of condition that Tom and I have both been gesturing toward. And I wonder if I could just read,
Please.
Mary Louise, as we close, what James Truslow Adams meant by the American dream. He described it as a democratic equality of condition, and he gave an example, the U.S. Library of Congress. And he described it this way: as one looks down on the general reading room, which alone contains 10,000 volumes, which may be read without even the asking, one sees seats filled with silent readers, old and young, rich and poor, black and white, the executive and the laborer, the general and the private, the noted scholar and the schoolboy, all reading at their own library provided by their own democracy. And then he said he considered this scene to be the perfect working out in a concrete example of the American dream. The means provided by the resources of the people themselves and a public intelligent enough to use them. And he said, if this example can be carried out in all departments of our national life, the American dream would become an abiding reality. James Truslow Adams was speaking to the common ground that Tom and I share.
Well, I would like to invite the two of you and all of you to make a date 25 years from now. We meet in this room. The world will have spun in ever crazier directions. We will all be looking back on the orderly, restful, halcyon year of 2025 with fondness. I look forward to discussing it then. I have immensely enjoyed this today. Thank you both.
Pleasure. Thank you. Thank you. You did a wonderful job.